What has been happening on the continent of Africa? On Hard Copy tonight, I speak with the president and founder of the Africa Diaspora Development Institute, Dr. Arikana Chihombori Kwao. Have we heard a voice speak up so strongly on the need for Africa and Africans to unite? Call. Your Excellency, it's a real pleasure to have you join us today on Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me, and keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. And it does appear that sometimes what people do intend for bad turns out to work out for good. You were relieved of your AU permanent representative job because powers that be were uncomfortable with your stance on neo-colonization, especially with the overbearing influence of France on states it once colonized. But it appears that no one saw the outrage that would greet that, and even how much more popular your gospel was going to get. Did you envisage all of this at all since 2019?
Not at all. Even during my tenure, I was simply delivering on my mandate. As a medical doctor, I went to Washington, of course, reluctantly. But of course, once a doctor, always a doctor. I started making diagnosis while I was in Washington. And my diagnosis, first and foremost, became the ignorance that we had of our understanding of Africa, not only as Africans, not as Black people around the world, but even members of Congress themselves, the US government, they really don't understand Africa. So I set out to address the issue of the ignorance about what was going on in Africa, educating the African diaspora primarily, and secondarily, those in the US government and anybody else that wished to listen to the message. Because I felt that that was the root cause of what was going on in Africa, the lack of understanding and appreciation of what was really going on in Africa, and more importantly, identifying the root causes. And for Africa, I came to the conclusion that France was the biggest risk to peace and security and overall African development, particularly in West Africa, because of one particular agreement that they would make the African heads of state sign when they were receiving their independence. It was a horrible, continues to be a horrible document that sadly, it has been allowed to continue to this very day, to the serious detriment of the Africans. So I set out to educate the Africans about France. Others would say, why didn't you talk about the British and all other colonizers? Yes, we would speak about them as well. But the one that is leading the pack, the one that is taking the crown of the abuse and exploitation, it is France. And I felt very strongly that if France can come to the table and also renegotiate those contracts, if France can leave Africa, that would be the beginning of true liberation. And I'm talking economic liberation of the African continent. So France is leading the pack because of its deep roots within Africa, because of the agreements that the heads of states were made to sign during independence of Africa.
Yeah, by that document, I know you were referring to the Pact on the Continued Colonization. I think you've made reference to it in quite a number of your speeches, the continued colonization of African states. Is that it?
That's correct, yes. That continues to be in place today. And through that document, African countries, the former French colonies, upwards, it used to be 85% of their bank reserves had to be deposited with the French treasury. It's now down to around 50 to 60%. To this day, poor countries are sending their bank reserves to France. To this day, poor countries, the first right of refusal of all contracts, public, private, large, small, French companies have first right of refusal. To this day, all minerals discovered yet to be discovered, France has the first right of refusal. To this day, those former French colonies, all their military must be trained by France. All their military equipment must be purchased from France. And France has a presence in their countries and can invade those countries without notice should they feel their French interests are being violated. So at every level, the document is horrible and it remains in place today. I was horrified when I began to see the extent to which people simply did not know. So I made that my mission number one. Because as a medical doctor, if you're dealing with let's say, an accident situation, you first assess the heart, Does the patient have a heartbeat? Is the patient breathing? You don't worry about the broken bone. You don't worry about other peripheral damages. You start with the core. If the patient is breathing, if the patient has a heartbeat, you must revive them, get a heartbeat, get the lungs, get them breathing, and then you can deal with the other peripheral issues. So I felt the heartbeat of what was ailing Africa started with France. If we can deal with what France is doing in Africa, dealing with the rest of the colonizers will be easy, for their roots are not as entrenched into Africa as the French roots to this day.
Well, there are a number of Africans who have also delved very deep into this. I mean, I mentioned Kwame Nkrumah, you know, right from the days of independence of many African countries. He also worked very hard for the independence of Ghana. We also have literary giants who've also delved into this. One of them is a Nigerian, Chinua Achebe, who has, you know, delved very deep into, you know, talking about the colonization and, you know, the neo-colonization of African minds and even our literature and how all of this seeps very deep. I mean, Things Fall Apart continues to be, you know, quite a literary work that everyone refers to. But some people say, you know, we talk about root causes and immediate causes. What share, if you were to distribute, say, causes, I don't want to say blames, but if you were to, maybe I should use that word blame. If you were to distribute blame along root causes and immediate causes of where Africa currently is unable to fully achieve her potential, how will you distribute the blame?
I'm going to start with, of course, the mind, which is where, at the end of the day, that is where the problem really is. The legacy of colonization remains to be a serious issue for the African. It is the legacy of colonization that makes it difficult for us as a people to push back. Let me give a very simplistic example, and I use simplistic examples because I want people to really understand what's going on. Using the example of Niger, there is a mutiny in the school cafeteria. The students are sick and tired of a bully who's been taking their lunch for centuries. Finally, they've garnered enough courage. They now have enough knowledge to understand, and they're ready to stand up and push back against the bully. The question then becomes, why has it taken the students so long to stand up and push the bully back? It's because the students have been made to believe that you are inferior. The students have been threatened. The students believe that they're not as good as the bully. The headmaster, some have been smart enough and have tried to push back. Guess what? They were assassinated. But finally, the students now have enough knowledge. Question is, why has it taken this long for the students to have enough courage? But be it as it may, the legacy of slavery, the legacy of colonization left the African in feeling inferior, feeling they're incapable, admiring everything else that somebody else is doing, that everything African is undesirable, that we're always looking to what those who don't look like us are doing, and we want to emulate what they are doing. Mm-hmm. That, to me, the biggest risk to Africa's development is the mind. When we can... Yes, go ahead.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I just wanted, you know, to focus on that particular question. If you were to distribute, and I'm not going to, you know, take away from the fact that you said, you know, the mind is where we need to start from. But if you were to distribute it in terms of, you know, apportioning blames to the root cause and the immediate cause, because people have also pointed at how it is that Africans themselves are conducting themselves and, you know, do not seem to have sufficient compassion for the people as African leaders, do not have sufficient compassion for the people that they lead. How would you distribute this particular blame? Would you say 50% to root causes, 50% to immediate causes? In what proportion would you share it?
I would say the biggest problem right now is the mind. I still believe it is the mind. Secondly, the average African leader is fighting with their hands tied behind their back, and in some cases also blindfolded. I really don't want us to get lost in the mud about peripheral issues. Remember what I said. You get into an accident situation, first you said the heartbeat. Does the patient have a pulse? Is the patient breathing? We worry about the blown up eye, we worry about the broken bone later. We must go to the root causes. If a president of a country, my daughter, let me take you, you become the president of Nigeria today, with all good intentions, you are told, do not talk about your military, because we got that under our control.